Beis HaMikdash. And this description is used as the Haftorah here, that reflects the Parsha Tetzaveh, which deals with the building of the Mishkan and deals with the Korbanos, the sacrifices that were to be brought in the Mishkan. So in line with that, the Haftorah Tetzaveh is the Navi Yechezkel's description of this Beis HaMikdash. Now, there's a difference of opinion in the rabbis whether or not this Beis HaMikdash which Yechezkel describes is the second Beis HaMikdash or the third Beis HaMikdash. I think it's 339. And most of the Meforshim say it refers to the third Beis HaMikdash, the one that will eventually stand again in Jerusalem. So the Haftarah begins, Atah ben Adam, the phrase that's used throughout the Navi Yechezkel that he described himself with is Ben Adam, you who are the son of man, because Navi Yechezkel sees himself not only as an individual, but he sees himself as representative of the Jewish people, and the Jewish people generally as representative of all of humanity. And therefore, his term of description, his term of self-description is always Ben Adam, you who are the son of man. Hageides Beis Yisrael Asabayitz, tell the Jewish people the dimensions, the structure, the type of building that the Beis HaMikdash will be. V'yikolmu me'avonoseihem. The word v'yikolmu has a double meaning. Yikolmu means to end. They will end their sins, and Yikolmu means also they'll be ashamed of their sins. So the Meforshim point out to us that there are two ways that a person repents, so to speak. One is out of embarrassment. He realizes that what he has done is wrong, is bitterly wrong, and therefore he is embarrassed over what he has done, and he attempts to repent and return. The second one is not so much a sense of embarrassment as a sense of revelation as to what positive things he now could do. He sees himself in a different light, and therefore he abruptly changes. He makes a commitment and, tomorrow I'm going on the diet. It's an abrupt change. It's a commitment that has a suddenness to it. So when the Jewish people are aware that the Beis HaMikdash is going to be built, so they will undergo a sudden metamorphosis, a sudden change. Umoridu es tochnis. The Jewish people will measure the Beis HaMikdash, the plans. Tochnis here is the plans, the architectural plans, the dimensions of the Beis HaMikdash. Now, what does this have to do with the dimensions of the Beis HaMikdash? So the Meforshim explain that the Beis HaMikdash was representative of the person's soul. It was the physical manifestation of the soul of the Jewish people and of each and every individual Jew. And therefore, in the dimensions of the house, in the dimensions of the Beis HaMikdash, there lay spiritual and psychological dimensions, mental dimensions. And we're not merely talking here about yards or feet or inches or space, because in many areas of the Beis HaMikdash we know that miracles existed and space did not exist. For instance, the Talmud tells us that the Aron Kodesh occupied no space. The sanctuary that it was in was 20 amos, 20 cubits. So if you measured from the wall to the side of the Aron Kodesh, it was 10 cubits. And if you measured from the other side of the Aron Kodesh to the wall, it was also 10 cubits. Yet in the middle was the Aron Kodesh, and the entire space was only 20 cubits. So it occupied no space, so everybody saw it did occupy space. That was one of the ideas, that the Beis HaMikdash is not just space, it's not just area, but it's representative of spiritual dimensions. So when we measure the building, we're really measuring ourselves. We're really measuring our inner dimensions. V'im nichlemu mikol asher asu, and if they realize that they will now end everything that they have done until now, that they are ashamed, that they repent from everything that they have done now, so that the Talmud tells us that if a person truly repents the wrong that he has done, then the wrong not only is erased, but the wrong becomes positive. The wrong has the averos becomes chiyos. They become beneficial. There are many ways to understand it, but one way to understand it is that simply the experience of the wrong, and now I realize that it was wrong, so that experience is enough that I am able to survive. I'll never do that again. There's always a mystery about doing something that you've never done before, but once a person has done it and realizes that it's not beneficial, so then even though you take the chance, it's like teenagers smoking. So some people, the first cigarette is the last cigarette in their life. They're cured from it. It's horrible. Other people become addicted, and then they're on it all the rest of their life. Well, it's the same thing with sin. But when the person realizes that what he has done is wrong, and he repents of it, so then it becomes a positive thing. So that's what he says here. If they will regret everything that they have done until now, so now we'll be able to talk about the Beis HaMikdash. They will see the Beis HaMikdash in a different light. They will see the form of the house and its measurements, Mosov and Movov, its exits and its entrances, V'chol Tzirosov, and all of its forms. He's called Chukosov, all of the laws that apply. So here he's talking about the fact that in architecture, in mathematics, there are certain rules that are also not understandable, but it works that way. And that we adopt them simply because of the practicality. We know how much stress a beam can take. It's a geometrical function of the pillar, of the column, of how an architect, of an engineer figures it out. The whole Torah, so too is that true in human life. Now, human life is therefore to be seen as a structure, and there are certain laws that apply, right? There's the good old Williamsburg Bridge. If you don't paint it and you don't take care of it, it collapses, no matter how imposing a structure it is. And it's an enormously imposing structure. And it looks like it should be able to stand forever, yet it will collapse. The same thing is true of a person, of everything in a person, right? That has to be maintained. It requires constant work. So the entire structure of the Beis HaMikdash is representative of the human being. Teach this to the Jewish people. Teach them the form of the Beis HaMikdash, because then you're teaching them lessons about themselves. Uchsov le'inayim, and write it down before their eyes. And this is the chapter that we have, that it's written down before us so that we'll be able to know it. The Yishmu is called Suroso, so the Jewish people will be able to guard its form, that's called Chukosov, and all of its laws, the Osuosom, and they shall do that. And they shall build it in that fashion. Again, in the long exile of the Jewish people preserved in their mind's eye the land of Israel, they preserved Jerusalem, they preserved the Holy Temple. Through chapters such as these, to them it was real. Because it was real, then they never lost the dream. They never lost the ability to identify with it. And part of it is because Chukoso. Part of it is because it's illogical. It has within it laws that are not explicable, but nevertheless are functional and they work. This is the law regarding the Beis HaMikdash. This is its form. Al Rosh Shahor, it will be on the top of the mountain. We're talking the top of the mountain Moriah, Har Moriah, which was the mountain of Yerushalayim, the tallest mountain in Yerushalayim. I've mentioned to you a number of times that the Romans lowered the mountain. They plowed it under in the year 135. They took off about 1,000 feet, 300 meters from the top of the mountain. And so that the mountain that we see today with the mosques on top of it, that's a much lower level. Because that was a form of punishment after the rebellion of Bar Kokhba, so they wanted to show that it would never be rebuilt. They destroyed it. They plowed it under. They renamed the city of Jerusalem, was renamed Aelio Capitolina. They took away its name, Jerusalem. And Emperor Hadrian thought he was going to end it. Not the first one that thought he was going to do it. Unfortunately, he wasn't the last either. So Al Rosh Hahor, on the top of the mountain, a large part of the second Beis Hamikdash was built on an artificial mountain that King Herod built. He extended the mountain to make the Beis Hamikdash larger and to make a greater courtyard and a portico and everything. Herod would fit very well in Muncie. He had very good ideas. He knew how to remodel a house. So he built the mountain. He made it bigger in order to be able to extend the courtyard. So the mountain that we see today is really far different than the mountain upon which the Beis Hamikdash stood, the first Beis Hamikdash and the second Beis Hamikdash. It's shorter, but on one hand it's longer, extended, and also the erosion has taken place over the centuries. So it's hard to get the exact picture. If you want the exact picture, you got to buy Rabbi Resnick's video, which is on sale in the shul, in the yeshiva of the Second Temple, which is really an excellent and informative and entertaining work. And you'll have a picture of how the Beis Hamikdash stood and what Herod did to it and how it looks in relation to today's mountain. So that when you go there, you'll be able to figure, you'll know more than the guy, which is not hard. Kol Gvulot Soviv Kodesh Kadoshim. So the boundaries of the Beis Hamikdash were holy. In other words, the Beis Hamikdash was set away from the city. The city of Jerusalem has a holiness, and the Beis Hamikdash has a greater holiness. So the Beis Hamikdash was set away from the city. The Temple Mount, nobody lived in the area of the Beis Hamikdash, except the Kohanim who lived in the apartments which were in the buildings of the Beis Hamikdash. But what we see today, for instance, the Jewish quarter, that was the city of Jerusalem. That's where people lived. And then the valley that you go down to the wall, then all the stairs that you go down to the wall, that was the valley that separated the Beis Hamikdash from the city. And leading from the city to the Beis Hamikdash were large bridges on tremendous arches. And you can see the remains of some of the arches in the wall itself. Robinson's Arch, Wilson's Arch. Those were arches that supported this tremendous bridge. And the bridge led directly from the Beis Hamikdash into the city so that you didn't have to go down the valley and up again. And all of that was part of Herod's temple. It was part of his construction. He built those tremendous arches, which were destroyed by the Romans and later by the Byzantines and the Crusaders. Still, we have only the few remnants today of the arches on the wall itself. Those are called springing arches because they spring out of the building, out of the wall itself. It's a tremendous engineering feat, and it was a tremendous ability of mathematical calculation to know how much stress the wall could take to be able to support. That's why the wall is so thick, by the way, because the wall supports those arches. The stress is on the wall, and from the wall the arches spring out. So all of the borders around are holy. Hine zos Torah Sabois. These are the dimensions of the house, of the Beis Hamikdash. Now, here's a description of the Mizbeach, because in the Parsha of Tetzaveh, one of the main descriptions of the Kelim is the Mizbeach. Eilem Midos HaMizbeach. These are the measurements of the Mizbeach, of the altar. So, this Mizbeach, even though the rest of the description of the Beis Hamikdash here is regarding the future Beis Hamikdash, the third Beis Hamikdash, the description of the altar was the altar that was built for the second temple. The builders of the second temple used the dimensions of the prophet Yechezkel to build the second Mizbeach. The first Mizbeach that Moshe built at the time of Shlomo was destroyed, and we no longer have that. So this was the Mizbeach. Ano v'tofach. It was, there are two, part of the great joy here is that if you think you understand anything, then the Gemara comes and shows you didn't understand it. Part of the problem is an amma. An amma, literally, the measure. So from the Talmud, it's from the elbow to the tip of the long finger, which can be anywhere from 18 inches to 2 feet. Now that in turn was divided into what was called a tefach. A tefach is a fist, approximately 3-4 inches. Now some amos had 5 tvachim and some amos had 6 tvachim. The same way that we have today, for instance, a pound or an ounce. So there's a troy ounce, which is used in jewelry. And there's a different ounce, which is the ounce that we use to weigh, to measure. And both are called ounces, but you have to know whether you're dealing in troy weight or whether you're dealing in the regular weight. Well, the same thing in the Tanakh, you always have to know whether they're dealing with an amma that's 5 or an amma that's 6. And that's confusing. So here, that's why he says amma and then amma v'tofach. One amma was the regular amma, which is the 5, and then amma v'tofach, an amma plus a tefach, which was the 6. Now, on top of that, there's a difference of opinion whether the amma was the same in length, except in one case it was divided into 5, or in the other case it was divided into 6, but the amma itself was the same, or whether, no, the other amma, the 6th amma, was really a 5th larger than the regular amma, right? Yogi Berra's terrible joke that he went to the pizza parlor, right? And the guy said, you want it in 6th or an 8th? He said, I'll take it in 6th. I'm not so hungry tonight. So that's the situation here. How do we measure? Was it the same measure or not? We don't know. The Cheiko Amma, Amma V'Rocha, the Amma Rocha. Now the Cheik is that the Mizbeach was terraced. It had a wider base, and then it indented, and it went up, and then it indented again, and it went up, so that there was 3 different widths. Sometimes you see in a good chess set, you know how the rook is built? It's terraced. The bottom is wide, and then it goes straight, and then it indents and goes straight again, and then indents and goes straight again. The Mizbeach was built that way. And on each of the indentations, there was a catwalk to walk on. And that's how the Kohanim walked. Because the Mizbeach was very tall. Mizbeach was 20 feet in the air. So therefore it was built with these indentations. So the Cheik was the name that was given to the bottom platform, which was the first indentation. And that also was an amma wide. And then in the middle of the Mizbeach, there was another catwalk like that, where the second indentation occurred. And then on top, there was a zeres. There was like a crown on top, which is where the third indentation, and there was like a fence around that catwalk, which made it look like a crown. It made it look like the ridges of a crown. And that was the top of the Mizbeach. From the first indentation down to the floor of the courtyard, Shtayim Amos was 2 amos. So 2 amos is about 4 feet. The Rochav Amo Echos, and the width was always this 2-foot width. Umehazora Haktano Arazora Hagdola, the pathway that led from the small Azora to the great Azora, Arba Amos V'Rochav Amo, was 8 feet wide. Now, the small Azora and the great Azora was as follows. There was a great courtyard where everybody entered. So even people that were not going to bring sacrifices, or people that came to pray, or people that came to observe, like on Yom Kippurim, The Azorah was full. So that's what we say in the davening, V'kohanim v'hom ha'omdim ba'azorah. And the word Azorah means a courtyard, an enclosure. And that's why it's called Ezras Noshim. That was the enclosure for the women. There were different Azoros in the Beis HaMikdash, different sections, different courtyards, where different people stood while attending the services in the Beis HaMikdash, so to speak. So there was a small courtyard. That courtyard was basically for the Levites, for those that were actually working. So they stood there. And then there was a large courtyard, and that large courtyard, that was the courtyard for the public. And then there was a courtyard elevated, a balcony elevated, that was the courtyard for the women. And that was over and around, like a U-shape, over and around the main courtyard. And that was, because of that, that has been the tradition in synagogues throughout the centuries, that the women's section, instead of being on the same level as the men's section, always was elevated. And because in the Beis HaMikdash, the women's section was elevated. Now, whether it was reached by stairs or by a ramp, there's a difference. You have to see Rabbi Resnick's video. There are two opinions as to how it worked. But the large courtyard, so Herod's large courtyard, that's what he expanded. Herod's large courtyard could contain over 100,000 people in the courtyard at one time. And it was full many times on the holidays and on other times. That's a very large enclosure. That's why he built out the mountain to be able to hold such a mass of people. You also have to have very good foundations and stilts, etc., to support that kind of weight. And the motion, etc. We had it engineered very well. The first Beis HaMikdash apparently was smaller. Whether the population was smaller but it was smaller in size. The third Beis HaMikdash apparently will be larger. Now, at the top of the Mizbeach, there was a bonfire that burned eternally. That was the Ner Tomid. There were two places where there were eternal flame in the Beis HaMikdash. One was on top of the Mizbeach, and the second was in the menorah. The menorah had one candle called the Ner HaMaravi, which never was extinguished. So sometimes it never was extinguished because it burned miraculously. Sometimes when the Jewish people were not worthy of the miracle, then they had to keep on putting oil in order to have it burned. That's why the Jews were not as surprised as one would think by the miracle of Hanukkah, by the fact that it burned for 8 days, because they were accustomed that in the menorah there was a miracle. And the menorah, one of the candles, always burned eternally. That was called the Ner HaMaravi, the Western candle. Lest you think the Western candle means the candle on the west, you should realize that Jews are not that. We're more complex than that. It's the westernmost of the eastern candles. And that's why it was called the Ner HaMaravi. And it's a Machlokas Rashi and Tosfos, exactly which candle it was. But in any event, that was one Ner Tomid. The second Ner Tomid was the Ner Tomid on the Mizbeach. That the Mizbeach itself, the altar, had an eternal flame. It had like a pilot light that never went out. Mizbeach was not electric ignition. It had a pilot light that never went out. Now, in the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, one of the miracles was that this flame was in the shape of a crouching lion, which was the symbol of the Jewish people, the symbol of the house of David. And the flame burned in the form of a crouching lion. That was not present in the second Beis HaMikdash. In the second Beis HaMikdash, there were a number of miracles that were present in the first Beis HaMikdash that were not present in the second. But that had a name. That flame had a name, the area, and it was called the Harel, or the Hariel. Hariel is a lion, God's lion. Hariel, or Harel. If you go today, the outside Yerushalayim, the first interchange on the on the Tel Aviv-Jerusalem highway, from Jerusalem going to Tel Aviv, is called Somet Harel, the Harel interchange, because one of the platoons of the Israeli army in the War of Independence was called the Harel Brigade. And it was named after the commander, Harel, but the name comes from here, and the name is short for Ariel, which is a name that we use, right? Ariel, right? Which is this name, right? God's lion. That's what the name stands for. I mean, that's its literal name, and that was the fire, the fire at the head of the Mizbeach. So that, Lamaila HaKronos Arba, that was 4 amos. That was 4 amos. This area on top of the Mizbeach where the fire burned was 4 amos. And then they had corners, built up corners in each of the 4 corners of the altar. Each corner was built up an amo, was 2 feet high, so that it looked like turrets in the 4 corners. Every turret was 2 feet high. That's the description. Ariel, and now we described it. Shtei Mesrei Orech v'Shtei Mesrei Rochav. It was 12 by 12 from the middle to the end. Rochav Ravua El Arba Revov, and it was perfectly square. The top of the Mizbeach was perfectly square. Zora, and how large was the courtyard? Arba Esrei Orech, the Arba Esrei Rochav. This is the small Azora, was 28 feet by 28 feet. El Arbas Revoeho, to the 4 corners. The Hadvul Sobi Voso Chatzi Oamo, and it had a small fence around it, which was a foot high. The Acheklo Amo Sovi, and then it had this foundation. The Mizbeach itself was an amo around, umaloseu pnos kodim, and the staircase to mount the bottom indentation faced east. So again, a rabbi saw in this a description of a human being, right? How a human being has to be built. And that the Ariel, the fire, that's the person's mind, that's his greatness, his intellect, that's the person's thought process. And that's really the intellectual miracle, the gift of God. The human brain is by far, and now that we have computers, so we begin to sense a little what the human brain is. Because the human brain is far more than any computer. Even the weakest of us intellectually is greater than the greatest computer, which should be reassuring to us. I told one of the kids in the yeshiva, he said, I have such a good brain. What's my problem? I told him the software is the problem, all right? The input is bad. The brain is this miracle of the fire on God's altar. And the fire was protected on all 4 sides, as we see here. So the human being also, man's mind has to be protected. It cannot be left to its own devices. And it has to have a solid base. It has to have a foundation. It has to rest on something. It cannot just exist arbitrarily by itself and expect to exist. Vayomer Elai Ben Odom, and God said to me, again, Ko Amar Hashem Elokim Eile Chukos HaMizbeach B'Yom Heyososo. These are the laws regarding the dedication of the Mizbeach on the day that it will be sanctified, on the day that the Mizbeach is prepared for service. Lahalo Solav Allah, on that day when it will be able to bring upon it the offering to God, v'lizrok olav dom, and to sprinkle the blood thereon. Now the sprinkling, all of the dinim of the korban were essentially a link to the sprinkling of the blood. The sprinkling of the blood is what made it a korban. That was the kapora for the person. If a person brought a korban for himself, but that's based on the idea ki adomu anefesh. In the blood is the soul, is the person himself. So it was the symbolic sense that the person was sacrificing himself, which God does not wish, but symbolically a person should realize that, and by realizing that, then he becomes a new person. So you shall give the Kohanim. So it says, Kohanim haLeviyim. Kohanim are called Leviyim also. Every Kohen is a Levi. Not every Levi is a Kohen, but every Kohen is a Levi. And therefore in the synagogue sometimes if you don't have a Levi present, but you have a Kohen present, then the Kohen reads two Aliyahs, not just the Aliyah of Kohen, he reads the Aliyah of Levi as well. Every Kohen is a Levi. So you'll give to the Kohanim who are from Levi, that are descended from Tzodok. Tzodok was, as we'll see later, the last of the Kohanim Gedolim, and he was restored, his family was restored to become the first of the Kohanim Gedolim in the second Beis HaMikdash. Yoshua, who was his grandson, was restored to be the Kohen. Now the family of Tzodok, they were loyal to the Rabboni Shalom, and they were loyal to Judaism when the other Kohanim forsook it after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. So they gave up on the Jewish people, and they gave up on the fact that there would ever be another Beis HaMikdash. They gave up on the whole thing. And the family of Tzodok, they alone retained the faith that they would again serve in the temple. And because of that, they kept all of the laws of the Kahuna, all of the strictures, and all of the inhibitions placed upon the Kohanim, and therefore when the Beis HaMikdash was rebuilt, they were the Kohanim that served there and were the leaders of the Jewish people. We'll see, I mentioned it to you in the Haftorah of Shabbos Chanukah and the Haftorah of Baloscha, that he's the Kohen Gadol's son, though unfortunately his sons married the non-Jewish women. He was a Kohen Gadol and he didn't have Jewish grandchildren, which is one of the strange fates of life. So you will give them, they will bring par ben bokor lachatos, they'll bring a par ben bokor, an ox, lokeachto midomo, and after it is slaughtered, its blood will be taken, v'nosato al arba karnosov, it'll be put on the four corners of the altar. Arba pinos lazoro, and then the four corners of the courtyard, which is the great stairwell that leads up to the Mizbeach, the lagvu soviv, and all around the catwalk around the Mizbeach, the chiteso, so you shall cleanse it. How does it become cleansed? With the sprinkling of the blood. That's how it becomes cleansed. The chipartohu, and it will become forgiven, and then it will be able to serve as the Mizbeach. Now here you have a strange halacha which existed in the Mishkan and in the temple itself, that in order for the building or the Mizbeach to effectuate forgiveness, it itself has to be forgiven. Now, Rabbi saw in that a great moral lesson that one cannot judge others, and one cannot help others and sympathize with others and forgive others and bring others to greatness if there is not a feeling of empathy, if it didn't happen to you also. That's why the idea, for instance, of an unmarried clergy is anathema to the Jewish people, because that means that the person is irrelevant to his congregation. That's why we are not looking for, our rabbis say that whenever God looked for leaders for the Jewish people, they have to have a kupa shel shrotzim al shichmo. They have to have skeletons in their closet. We always looked for human beings. We didn't look for perfect people. Perfect people have no relationship to others. Perfect people are not a role model for others, because nobody can be, it's part of the danger. I've mentioned it many times. It's part of the danger that we have in all the plastic biographies that exist regarding and the great men of Israel is that they are portrayed as being so perfect that no one has any relationship to them. Right? What's it got to do with me? This great man, by the time he was 7 years old, he knew the whole Talmud by heart. And he never did anything wrong, and he was always a good person, no matter what happened. He never got angry. He never had to carry out the garbage. So what's it got to do with me? Right? He's not my role model. He's not real. And we know that in life it was not like that. That's why in the Tanakh, all the people who are portrayed are real people. And in the Talmud, they're all real people. The true heroes of the Jewish people are real people. So in order for the Mizbeach to be effective, the Mizbeach itself had to be forgiven. That's the symbolism here. Rakachta is parachatos, and you'll take the carcass of the animal that brought this, that they brought on the Mizbeach, Usrafel the Mifkad Abayis, and it will be burned, the carcass will be burned, the Chutz LaMikdash outside the Beis HaMikdash. So that's a restatement of what it says in the Parsha of Tetzaveh, that when Moshe dedicated the Mishkan, that's what he did. Moshe served for the first 7 days as the Kohen Gadol in the Mishkan until Aaron was anointed and installed on the 8th day. And during the first 7 days, Moshe took and he performed it. And there it says also that Moshe took the ox and it was burned outside of the area of the Mishkan. Vayom Hasheni, on the next day, Takriv Sir Yizim Tomim Lachata. So the first day they brought an ox, the second day is a goat. And all sorts of symbolism in that. That's mentioned, and Kabbalistically, the soil was always a chatos, and the par in the aisle was an ola. And they shall use its blood the same way they use the blood of the ox. We have this on Yom HaKippurim, that in the Avod on Yom HaKippurim, that there was the dam afor and the dam soyer. The blood was held in different containers, and then it was mixed together, and the Kohen Gadol sprinkled the blood on the altar. After the Kohen finishes cleansing, purifying the Beis HaMikdash, Takriv Par Ben Bochor Tomim. Then he will bring an ox. Tomim means without imperfection, without blemish. The ayil minatzon tomim, and a ram, v'ikravtem lifnei Hashem. V'yishlichu ha'kohanim aleim melach, they shall throw salt upon it. So in the Mizbeach, it says, Al kol korboncha takriv melach. Salt was put on every korban. And salt also is a great symbol. It's a symbol of preservation. Before refrigeration, everything, all foods were preserved in salt. And salt is a symbol of taste. Salt is the symbol of life itself. It was one of the basic discoveries of man. And we have a remembrance to the Mizbeach because our tables that we eat upon are the Mizbeach in our home, the shulchan in our home, the table in our home is the altar. And therefore, whenever Jews eat bread, they put salt on it. Or better still, they dip it into the salt, which is the way the salt was applied in Mizbeach. They took the meat and dipped it in the salt. So that's why we have salt on the... when you make a motzi, you always have salt. And the only exception being the Seder night, when we eat the matzah, we eat it without salt, because then it's lechem oni, it's the bread of affliction. The poor man, they couldn't afford. Salt was very, very valuable. To us today, salt, you go and you buy a box of salt, it's still one of the cheapest items in the store. But it wasn't always like that. And if you want to see that, in the Tower of London, in the exhibition of the British Crown Jewels, they have gifts of salters, which were dishes of salt that were given to the king and queen at their coronation, except the salt is surrounded by gold, by silver, by emeralds, by diamonds. They're just magnificent things. All of the somim spice boxes that we have, the traditional Jewish spice boxes that are like castles, you know what I'm talking about? Well, those are all originally copies of boxes of salt. In the Middle Ages, they preserved the salt there. And because salt was so valuable, so they made it extremely decorative. And it became it was the chandelier of its day. It had that quality to it. And always in Jewish homes, salt was a valuable commodity because it was used on the altar in the Mizbeach. And it was brought up as an offering to God. Shivas yomim tates yirchatas layom upar ben boker v'al minat tzon tmimim yasu. For 7 days will the dedication take place. Every day they will offer this offering. Shivas yomim, for 7 days. Yichapru es hamizbeach, they will purify. They will remove any sin. They will dedicate the altar. V'tiaru oson, will be purified. Umilu yodov, and it will be dedicated. V'yichalu es hayomim, and they will finish this week of dedication, which is always mentioned as the week of dedication, just as it is in the Chumash here. Then regarding the first Mishkan, on the 8th day forward. So that's one of always the magic numbers in Jewish life. You know, we have magic numbers. One of them is 7, right? 7 days. There are 7 days after a wedding, and there's, God forbid, 7 days in times of mourning, and there's the 8th day is the day of the Milah by a child. So in the dedication of the Beis Hamikdash, the 7 days were days of dedication when the Beis Hamikdash did not function. It was just dedicated. And then on the 8th day forward, Yasu HaKohanim ala Mizbeach es halaseichem v'shalmeichem. Then your offerings can be brought. After the Beis Hamikdash has been dedicated by itself for this 7-day period, then your offerings can be brought. The Korban Olah, which was an offering that was brought completely to God. Nobody had anything from it. It was all burned on the Mizbeach. Or a Korban Shlomim, where everybody had something from it. Part of it was on the Mizbeach, and part of it went to the Kohen, and part of it the man who brought it, the family who brought it, who dedicated it, ate from it also. For Ratzisi Eschem, and I shall accept you, God says. Not that I'm accepting the building, and not that I'm accepting the offering. The building, the offering, all of that is only symbolic. I shall accept you. It's the person that counts. Sometimes that's part of the problem, that in the pomp and the ritual and the ceremony and the building, you will lose sight of the purpose. We are so busy with the trappings of it that we lose sight of the purpose. So therefore the Navi phrases it this way, Ratzisi Eschem, I shall accept you, Nu'um Hashem Elokim, thus says the Lord your God. Now that was the Parsha of Tetzaveh. Now I'm going to do with you for the last few moments, I'm going to study with you the Haftorah for the Parsha of Vayakel, and that will conclude our study of the book of Shmos.